Hi, my name is Glenn Jones. My book is about human resources changing the world, and it's about a critical examination of where HR is today, why HR directors don't become CEOs, and the steps and actions that need to happen to change the future focus of HR. I suppose in this day and age, especially in the recession years, the focus on costs has been really there, and will probably continue now into the 2020s and thereafter. But one of the key things that I've found is that actually the companies and businesses that have been successful have been able to actually not only look at the commercial aspects of what they do, but balance that with the human element of it as well. So if we consider that people are our greatest component of everything we do, then you have to not only just be looking at the numbers, you have to be looking at, so what does that do to my people? What message does that say to my workforce that's leading behind me? And although the focus on commercials is right, there has to be a balancing act against that, which says, can I do a commercial change which has the positive outset for the employees that work for me? That is the key crutch of what needs to happen now. A focus about people, but also about commercials. Finance is a key contributor to life in the boardroom. You can't get away from it, and as a CEO you have to have that commercial lens to you. And the finance people that do become CEOs are really good at what they do, but you don't necessarily have to have the full understanding of finance and commerciality. You have to have an appreciation, because at the end of the day, if you're a CEO, you have the people around you that you have to rely on. I come back to the tripartite agreement that has to be there at board level. It has to be the CEO, it has to be the FD, and it has to be the HR. HRness is a new term that I've coined in my book around putting the people aspect front and center. Unfortunately, over the years, HR has lost that people aspect of it. It's become more of a do rather than innovate, rather than actually lead strategically in the people agenda. And I think bringing back that people aspect into organizations, companies around the world is a key contributor to what happens next. Technology will come along, but without the people to be alongside it, it's not going to happen. It's a great question, and I can only put it down to one thing: the pressures on the CEO to actually make a difference for their shareholders. Simple as that. They have to deliver. So if you have the commercial factors in play that you have to better year on year, then straight away what most companies tend to do is go, I know, let's look at our people. But you can do that in a way that actually balances the people effect, so that actually if you have to make commercial decisions, you could take your organization along with you. And again, it's a key contributor to how organizations will survive in the future. So Mary Barra was a great example of somebody who did become a CEO and is still with General Motors today. But what Mary did, which was different, was that she necessarily didn't essentially just focus on one type of the business. She started off life in technology, she moved into HR, she got a great appreciation for what HR meant, but she also had the business bent and the passion for the business to then translate that into a CEO level position, which meant that she was able to not just think about the commercial, not just think about marketing and sales, but she had the people awareness as well as that in a bag of tricks, which meant that she was able to actually sort of create something different. And that's the difference with those HR directors who then come on to become CEOs. And that's the difference that they have. They're not stereotypes, they are multifaceted and multifunctional from what they've covered off. It's a great question, and for me, yes and yes is the answer. Yes and yes, because ultimately the stereotypes that are out there in HR tend to follow the same model. And we do need to, unfortunately, look at what HR directors' behaviors, skills and competencies are. And in the book, I talk about this at great length, where I had a look at the core behaviors and commitments or competencies of great CEOs. And what is clearly missing from HR today are those competencies. And also, I think from a point of view of the glass ceiling that exists in HR, we need to remove that and actually sort of celebrate those HR directors who have become CEOs and make them available to those HR directors who have aspirations, if they're out there. Because this is about the parity at board level. So if you can imagine, you have the CEO who's strategically looking over everything. You have the finance director who's looking at the numbers. So without somebody there to actually be put in the people aspect of it, what happens? And I think for me, that's the simple answer. It's around somebody who has the ability to translate the commercial into a people agenda, which then has the finger on the pulse of what happens next. And I think without the HR director being in that tripartite agreement, you would only have one lens coming through, and that's going to be the commercial lens. I wrote an article, funny enough, a few weeks ago on LinkedIn, where I was actually sort of asking the question, has HR gone too far to the right? i.e., have we put far too much onto line managers? Why I asked this question is because someone said to me a few months ago around, well, actually, what is HR doing? What are you doing to allow my people to go out and sell what they need to sell, for instance, instead of tying me up with bureaucracy and stuff like that? So therefore, I think there's a real line in the sand that's got to be evaluated now. There's a lot of thinking around design thinking, the customer experience on employees when new processes and procedures. But I think now more than ever, HR has got to be fundamentally looking at itself and saying, actually, the processes and procedures that we have in place, the technology that we have in place, who is it serving? Is it serving HR? Is it serving the business? And is it adding value? Question mark. It's interesting because one of the factors that I've seen, which so far has come through for those HR directors that have become CEOs, is their CEOs that were there before took the time, energy and effort to really sort of aspire them to come through and mentor them to come through and give them the space and the credibility to come through. So first and foremost, I think it's very much around the CEOs that are there having the aptitude to really challenge the traditional blueprint as to who becomes CEOs, number one. Number two, it's then sort of reaching into those HR directors who have become CEO and allowing them to really sort of talk openly about their journey and to push away the glass ceiling that exists today, so that actually it inspires those HR directors to go on to greater things. So mindset is a critical factor in the change and evolution of HR. It has to believe that it's there for a reason. It's been so put down by the non-value added tag that it's almost self-belief now. It's almost a doctrine that they're afraid to go into the boardroom and utilize the good data that they have. Never before in the history of HR have they had so much data with these new technologies that are coming through. But unfortunately, not everybody, and I am generalizing, not everybody is able to actually translate that data into viable, influential, strategic, commercial changes that enables them to actually sort of push the function forward. And I think until they have that ability to use everything they've got, the insight into people, and to translate that into meaningful things, they will suffer. But actually, the reality is that a mindset shift isn't a difficult thing to do. They've just got to have those role models who can change that and enable them to think, actually, they do add value. And that's really important. So HR innovation for me is looking at what are they doing today. It's actually taking time to stop. It's actually looking at the business and going, how is HR supporting the business and driving through that talent agenda, that right time, right people, right place agenda? You know, when we look at how HR can influence in the boardroom, It's about sort of making sure that the talent is there and it's developed accordingly. So for me, it comes down, Matt, to the simple thing of stopping what they're doing today and looking at everything that they've built and potentially ripping it up and going, okay, so how do we start again? How do we start with a set of policies, for instance, that actually, instead of tangling people up in bureaucracy, release them to go on and actually are empowered to actually sort of live and breathe the company? And it's looking at the technology too, with a customer-focused mindset on, instead of actually needing to have all of these checks and balances and 20 sign-offs before I get somebody in through the door, to actually go looking at it and go, common sense is we need 2, if 1. And let's design it that way so we have the customer at the end of it. We still get what we need from a HR perspective, and that's compliance, but it actually removes all of the bureaucracy out of the way. That's it for me.